Today we aim to update you on key developments in the public sector, procurement and research, and outline what Larder Cymru propose to do moving forward. The public sector in Wales spends an estimated £90 million per annum on food and drink, and there's a great emphasis, or it's an increasing emphasis in recent years in demonstrating them and measuring the social value and sustainability of food and drink supply chain. Larder Cymru's aim is to help the Welsh food and drink businesses be part of the public sector procurement. Now, I'm sure most of you hopefully will be by now familiar with Zoom and Teams, so I'd like to encourage you to use the question and answer chat functions to participate, and we'll answer them as we go along. The presentations today are in English, but you're welcome to contribute in the language of your choice. We'll be starting our presentations with a presentation from Sophie Colquhoun, representing the Food and Drink Wales Insight Programme and taking us through the latest research on food and drink in public places. Sophie has been heavily involved in the value of Welshness research undertaken in recent years and will be sharing the latest insight that is relevant to the public sector. We'll then look at the Welsh Government objectives in relation to food in the public sector. Parsons Myrddin Davies, who are supply chain leads with the project, will discuss the latest on free school meals and procurement reform in Wales. We will also have an update on social value from Jenkins. Works with the social value portal in Wales, particularly with the public sector. The social value portal aims to promote better business and community well-being through the integration of social value into day-to-day business. So croeso ato ni, Pris. Mark Grant is currently working on procurement projects on behalf of the Food and Drink Welsh Government Food Division and Foundation Economy team. That's quite a mouthful, and he will discuss the current activity relevant to the sector. And we will conclude with Greg and Myrddin, who will talk us through the next steps and support available through the Larder Cymru Project. So we've got quite a full agenda, but please do contribute via the Q&A, and we hope to finish as close to 11 AM as possible. So on that note, I will then transfer the reins to Sophie. So diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and crack off because I know we've got quite a tight agenda this morning. So hopefully this will work. Please someone shout at me if it's not. Yeah, is that okay, everybody? Yeah, fine. Okay, I'm just going to put it down there. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here today just to talk about the value of Welshness in the out-of-home market. And we included a piece on public sector provision within the survey this year. So it's a significant piece of work, which I think is very relevant for this morning. It's part of a whole piece of work that we've been doing on the value of Welshness over the last few years, which has covered both retail and out-of-home market. The bit I'm going to talk about today is the online piece of work that we've done, the survey piece of work, where we talked to 1,000 people in England and 400 people in Wales. Obviously, I'm going to focus on what Welsh guests want in this case. And just so you know, we also made sure that we picked up a large proportion of people who had public sector interaction. So of the 400, 245 people had a public sector interaction. And what we mean by that was they either worked in the public sector, had school-aged children, had been inpatient in a hospital in Wales, or had worked in the private or charity sector and had access to a staff canteen. So we know that our survey is relevant for the public sector that I'm going to talk about. Before I get into the detail, I just want to talk about one other thing. We also do quite a lot of work, or have done a big piece of work last year around guest segmentation. So the different types of guests that come and their attitudes towards food. The reason I want to show this is because some of this is relevant for some of the stuff later on. So we came up with sort of 6 attitudinal types based on some pretty significant work with YouGov, and then with a 4 in London who segmented the marketplace based on 6 segments: adventurers, food lovers, healthy lifestyle, busy lifestyle, ethical eaters, and traditionalists. And they all have slightly different attitudes to food, and therefore for some people and some segments, some things are more important, and I'll explain the relevance as we go through. Before I talk about the public sector, I want to talk a little bit about the private sector. And I suppose why? Because I think that what people do in the private sector probably then also influences what they do in the public sector. So when they're choosing stuff out of their own money, when they're out of home, what does that mean? What does that mean? And is that then similar to the sort of things that they're saying in the public sector? And I think, you know, I'm not giving anything away by saying there is quite a similar commonality. And I'm going to whiz through this bit, and I'm going to talk about 6 key things. Firstly, you know, how much Welsh food and drink was available? What did people think? Is it important for Welsh venues to offer Welsh food and drink, and if so, why? Would guests like more Welsh food and drink? Should we be promoting Welsh food and drink? And will they pay more? So from a business point of view, will they pay more? And finally, does having more Welsh food and drink attract more guests? Now, I know this is predominantly public sector procurement, but you will have some selling points as well within your organisation. So I still think there are elements that are relevant, but more about the attitudes that is more important. So from the first question then is how much Welsh food and drink is available? 8 out of 10 guests said there was some Welsh food and drink available wherever they went. And we looked at hotels, pubs, cafes, bakery shops, restaurants, gastropubs, everywhere that people could eat out of the home. We asked them to ask these questions. And then we asked businesses, you know, how much Welsh food and drink do you make available? And 7 out of 10 said some Welsh. What was quite interesting, and this is the first bit of gap stuff, which I think, you know, there might be some relevance again in the public sector. When we actually analysed pub menus, we actually only found 5 out of 10 talking about Welshness on the menu. They may be using ingredients, but they're not sharing it. So there's a promotion gap. And potentially, is there a promotion gap even what we're doing in the public sector? And I suspect there might be. The second question then is it important for Welsh venues to offer Welsh food and drink? And if so, why? 90% of people think it's important to have dishes with Welsh ingredients in it in the out-of-home sector. 80% think it's important to have Welsh drinks in the out-of-home sector, or good range of Welsh drinks. I think those are pretty significant numbers. What's more interesting for me is that 2/3 of businesses think that Welsh food and drink is important. And what we're talking to business about is this Welsh need gap. So what we're saying is guests really want Welsh products, because they're telling us that, but only 2/3 of businesses think that, and there's a really significant gap there, and that closing that good gap could generate additional sales for businesses and venues. And I suppose the second question then is is it becoming more important? So since 2017, we asked the same question in 2017, and 77% said it was important to have a good range of Welsh food and drinks, and it's moved to 90% in 2021. So this idea of Welshness is becoming more important to guests or consumers. And CGA, who do a on-trade drink survey, announced that, you know, they did a piece last year where there's something like 26% of people are buying more local drinks. So this whole idea is not just a Welsh thing, it's a general thing, and shorter supply chains, but certainly within Wales, it is becoming more important. And why is it important? And if you talk to Welsh people, why is it important? The first thing is all about supporting the local economy. It's about supporting farmer, it's supporting local business. The second thing they talk about is about freshness, which in my word means freshness, inverted commas, means higher quality. So they think if it's local, it means it's probably fresher, therefore probably better quality. And the third thing is they think it's better for the environment. So all those things I think would be, no matter where we asked those, all those 3 things would stand. We asked the same question in England, by the way, and the only differential was they talked about experience. They thought that Welshness added a huge amount of experience as well within venues. And then I suppose the next thing is, you know, would guests like more Welsh food and drinks in the private sector? Yes, 8 out of 10 would like more Welsh and food and drinks. So they know there's quite a bit, but they want more. And going back to those segmentation pieces we talked about there at the very beginning about the 6 different life stages, no matter which type of person you speak to, whether they're a ethical eater, as the one at the top there is, 84% said they wanted more Welsh in their menu. Even traditionalists who might be more reluctant, maybe to try new and have a bit less money, 7 out of 10 would still wanted more Welsh in the menu. So there's not a massive discrepancy. There's a very strong advocacy. And then which categories, and they talk about the ones that are sort of, in their eyes, probably sort of closest to the localness of things they can really think about. So meat, dairy, of course, for Welsh consumers or Welsh guests is really important, meat and dairy, followed by beers, wines and spirits, bakery, and then fruit and veg. I suppose getting towards the business end of this bit is, will people pay more for it? And when we asked in the out-of-home survey, 50% would pay more for a Welsh drink, 40% would pay more for, 40% would pay more for a Welsh drink, and 50% would pay more for a Welsh dish. And I think this is quite important because in those venues, then it's about choice. So people who wanted to pay more could pay more, and offering a choice would encourage people, if it was more expensive, to trade up. And when we asked a question about paying more, it was quite significant. It was about more than £1 for a dish. It was significant. And then we also asked is, should we be shouting about it? Should we be telling consumers that we're actually supporting Welshness? And nearly everybody says yes, actually definitely support Welshness. Yet, as we saw in the very beginning, only 44% of businesses claim to highlight any Welsh. So there's a huge promotion gap in the out-of-home private sector. And the last thing we asked in the private sector, or the last really big thing we talked about, is does it make a difference to attracting guests to the outlets or loyalty? And actually, for 3/4 of the guests, they were more likely to visit if it had a decent Welsh range. Is that significant? But more frightening or more scary, I suppose, for out-of-home venues. If we're not doing Welsh, then there's a risk of actually losing customers, because 1/4 of people are less likely to visit if there's no Welsh range. So from the private sector piece, I suppose there were 3 really big takeouts that I would talk about. One is, think about the types of guests that the venue's catering for. Have we got more ethical eaters or more traditionalists? What sort of range should we be thinking about? Review the top 5 categories that we've mentioned in this presentation, so meat, dairy, beers and wines and spirits, fruit and veg, bakery, and understanding, those, are we doing a really good job in those, and then potentially move on. And of course, if we're doing Welsh, really shout about it, because actually it's what guests want. So that is sort of a really run through of what the key output from the private sector was. What does it mean for public sector? So we asked a similar sort of type of question in the public sector. I remember we had 245 people answer this part of the survey, so it is robust, and they've had to have some interaction. So they either work in the public sector, have had school-aged children, are an inpatient or have been an inpatient in Wales, or work in the private or charity sector who have access to a staff canteen. So pretty broad, but we've got over 240 respondents based on that selection criteria. And we asked we really want to go through sort of 7 things on this. Is how much Welsh food and drink is provided? How much do you think is provided? Which sectors should provide more Welsh? Why more Welsh? Which categories are more important to you to be provided for? And should public sector pay more for Welsh? And would we as individuals pay more ourselves in tax for Welsh food and drink? And I suppose then the last question is, what are the barriers? And this is a private sector question to the businesses in Wales, but I think there may be some things there that are useful as well. So let's start with, how much Welsh food and drink is provided. And remember, this is what the public think. It's not, it's not what's there, but this is what they think. So, nearly 6 out of 10 think there's quite a lot of Welsh food and drink provided in the public sector. That's what they think. Say 6 out of 10 say that. I don't know how much there is, but 6 out of 10 think that. But it does vary a little bit by those segments that we talked about earlier. So whether you're an adventurer or a food lover or a healthy lifestyle, busy lifestyle, ethical eater or a traditionalist, it does vary a bit. So what we're seeing is adventurers and traditionalists, so the ones at either end of the scale, are less likely to think there's a lot of Welsh food and drink there. Maybe they're a bit more sceptical. Busy lifestyles also less. Just so you know, this was pretty unrobust. We're only talking about 14 respondents here, so the numbers are not robust for that. But it does show to me that it's interesting. There is a little bit of variation between the different groups, and therefore thinking about who we're trying to get messaging across to and comms in the future. Some of this sort of insight and the way we can apply it might be useful. So the second question is, which sectors should provide more Welsh? when we asked that question. We asked, we asked these options: schools, hospitals, care homes, local authorities, and we asked other as well. No one put much in for other. The number one came out was schools. If we're going to be providing Welsh most, firstly, it should be in our schools, then our hospitals. And as I say, down to canteens was last, but still 6 out of 10. And when you talk about hospitals in the over 55 group, and probably even if we think about who goes into hospital, probably over 55 group is pretty high on that list, then that was 95%. So 95% think they should be providing more Welsh food and drink. And why more Welsh? Well, it's very similar to the stuff that we saw when people were eating out of home in the private sector. So, supporting Welsh farming, supporting local producers, supporting the local economy. It's likely to be fresher. All those things that we saw in that one slide that I showed you earlier. And it's better for the environment. So the whole idea of quality and supporting local is absolutely at the heart of what this is about. And then the environment piece as well, because of the potentially shorter supply chain. And then which categories are more important to supply? Again, almost identical to the private sector piece. Dairy, fruit and veg, meat, baked goods, all in the top 4, all 4 of the top 5 from the private sector. The one that's different, of course, is probably alcoholic drinks, because potentially we're not going to be supplying so much of that in the public sector. But then pops in jams and chutneys, which I think is quite an interesting thought, obviously ahead of ready meals. And this was the question about, which are more important, so the ones we should be providing more of. And then I suppose we get to the business end from a public sector point of view is, yes, we want Welsh, but should we pay for it? And so the question we ask is, should we source Welsh if it's more expensive? And about half of people say, yes, we should do that. And it varies again by those types of people that we looked at earlier, from people like food lovers at the top left-hand side and adventurers and ethical eaters, unsurprisingly, all think even are more swayed, yes, we should be buying it. We should be buying if it's more expensive. People who are traditionalists and busy lifestyles and health eaters, less, slightly less likely, which is no surprise. And again, when we asked that again in the private sector, again, the number was similar. It was about half of people said, yes, actually, yes, I would buy it if it's more expensive. Yes, it should be sourced even if it's a little bit more expensive. And the net positive score, by the way, is something like 39% on that if you take the no bit as well. So it's significantly net positive. And then I suppose the really interesting question is, will I personally pay more for doing this? And of the people who said yes, we'd pay a bit more, so the 49% said half of the people, 90% of them said I would personally pay more for it, which is quite interesting. So obviously not everybody will, but of the half that said yes, 90% said yes, I personally would pay more for it. And how much? If you average it out, they said £1.13. I think the numbers are almost irrelevant here, but the £1.13 a week, which is massive. Obviously, the biggest number was 20p here. You can see the smallest number on offer was the one that they went for. So what they're really saying, I think, is most people, significantly most people would like more. Quite a few would actually pay a bit more for it. So, there is some potential thought around that. And potentially a little bit more. So where we're charging a little bit for food for services, then potentially there's some room for manoeuvre. The last piece of insight I just really want to talk about is the business survey. And this was a question we asked businesses in Wales: why are you not supplying any more Welsh, or what is it that's stopping you stocking more Welsh food and drink products? For 28%, or just under a third, they said actually nothing's stopping me. Well, this is up to 200 businesses, by the way. Nothing's stopping me. It's just personal choice. But the biggest reason where there was, a proper reason, that was the fact that, central control. They weren't having local control in terms of what they could provide. The next bigger thing was availability, and that was about supply chain. That was about the wholesalers not necessarily having the products that they wanted to buy through their supply chain. And then, of course, then there's price. But price in that mix is number 3 or 2 or 3 on that list after nothing. So it's not the most important thing in business. And I suppose the question for us is, what are the barriers that are stopping us doing this, and how can we potentially overcome it? And I really just want to finish with sort of 4 takeouts, and then maybe a little bit of a question, which I've sort of already articulated. The first thing is actually the public sector mirrors the private sector for preference for Welsh. The numbers are very similar. People want in their public sectors what they're trying to choose when they go outside of the home, and I think that is quite a big thing, because then it just says, okay, if we know that, then how do we try and replicate some of that in the public service sector? The second thing is, we know what the top 5 categories are, and the public want those first. So how do we really maximize those? Where can we focus and be laser sort of sharp on those categories? And I suppose there's one thing here that certainly one of the things that Visit Wales did, which I haven't shared a chart on some time ago, is that I think there is an informing piece for people throughout the supply chain about informing people about the public desire for Welshness at every level. So whether that's catering managers, whether that's like we're talking about purchasing people here today, but I think right the way through the chain, really getting people to understand how much the desire is for Welsh food and drink, I think is pretty important. And the last thing is, if we're doing it, we should shout about it because it adds value to our service. Shout about Welshness in every sector, because it will add, I think it will add quality perceptions, and it also ticks lots of boxes about supporting local and the right thing to do. And I suppose the last thing I really wanted to say, I suppose, the supply chain and central specifications in the private sector are really a significant barrier. I'm sure they're probably similar in the public sector, and I suspect that's what we're talking about and what this whole group is trying to break down. And I'm less than 20 minutes, so that's me finished. So I'm going to stop sharing. If anybody has a question that you'd like to ask, please put it in the chat. I'll be delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Sophie. That's a fantastic basis for this session, but also the rest of the Larder Cymru project over the next 2 years. The rationale to use Welsh produce is compelling both in the private sector and in the public sector. As Sophie mentioned, she'll be around for a while, so we can answer any questions in the chat, or we can come back at a later date. The session is being recorded, so you can share this at a later date as well, and we can also share the slides as well. So thank you very much, Sophie. Diolch yn fawr iawn. So on that, we'll move swiftly on to Greg and to Myrddin. I think Greg is up first. Over to you, Greg.
Just going to unmute, multitasking. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Sophie. What a great insight. So I think, there's no doubt whatsoever that Welsh produce is in demand. People want to buy and consume more Welsh produce. And what we want to share with you in this session is how, I'm just going to play my screen, is how the Welsh government, levers within the Welsh Government might be supporting that and actually embellishing that opportunity. So my name is Greg Parsons. I've worked with Menter Môn and the Môn Larder Project, and now the Larder Cymru Project since 2016. I work with Myrddin Davies, who you'll meet shortly, and we're the supply chain leads. So we'll be working with the wider group and many stakeholders to deliver the project, and we'll cover some of the next steps shortly. But just to share with you, as I say, Welsh Government-driven initiatives that should inspire us to push forward, really. So to start with, you'll all be abundantly aware that late last year, Welsh Government announced, or a cross-party initiative, with the aim to provide free school meals for all primary school children over the next 3 years, a £90 million investment, which is a fantastic opportunity. It creates an additional demand for 200,000 meals per year, roughly. That's based on, at the moment, 1 in 5 meals to primary school children that are served free of charge, and that's based on 90% of the other 4 being taken up across the period of the project per year. That's multiplied by an average spend of, say, £2.50, gives you a £500,000 net spend on food in the sector per year moving forward. So it's a great opportunity. And within the scope of this, it's been clearly identified that there are good things for children. Obviously, it gives the opportunity to feed healthier food. It gives an opportunity to increase the repertoire that children eat. And within that, to make children and everybody more aware of the great foods that are around them, of seasonality, and maybe even, who knows, about possible futures in the food and drink industry, because it's a badly underserved sector in terms of employment and struggling, especially currently. Also, through more children dining together helps to improve social skills. And I think we're all aware that, you know, if you eat healthily, if you're putting good fuel in, that has an ongoing effect on your behaviour and on your focus, or on the children's behaviour and focus when in lessons. Also, this is great for suppliers. Because it's been clearly stated the intention is to increase Welsh produce. It's been stated that the ambition is to buy through shorter supply chains, and in doing so, that will reduce carbon emissions. And there's a will to collaborate with producers and distributors, so it isn't this blatant tender for contracts and then wait for the next one to come around. There is more interaction between producers and distributors, and again looking at longer term security, and examples of that, and just touching quickly on some of the points Sophie raised, is, you know, we've done some work in the past working with you and the team at Gwynedd to increase the range of products available through the wholesale distribution channels, which then enables them to include those products within tenders. And similarly, speaking to Ian Rees down in Caerphilly, and some of the things they've done to fulfill their demand with local suppliers, and you know, in their words, it's not been easy. And they really need more suppliers to step forward and want to be part of that supply chain in future. And that's one of the big challenges, and that's where we think we can help. Again, we'll touch on that later. Other challenges that face the implementation of this is the increased capacity in workforce that is needed, but also extensions to kitchens, kitchen developments, and of course dining space as well. But these are all things that people are aware of and that can plan for. So the actual timing around the initiative is this year, last year was it all part of the planning phase. The idea is that youngest learners, it starts to be implemented in September 2022, and then be ready to launch this widely to all primary school children in September 2023. So it's a fantastic opportunity, coupled with the fact that people want to consume and buy more Welsh produce. And as I say, we'll touch on later some ways in which we can help more Welsh suppliers to help to make the most of that opportunity. So that's me for now. I'll be back a bit later. I'm going to hand across to Myrddin to talk about some of the other elements within the Welsh Government.
Diolch yn fawr, Greg. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so bore da bawb, I'm Myrddin Davies and one of the supply chain leads in Larder Cymru. The item I'm covering this morning is the procurement reform activity that's happening in Wales at the moment. So since the UK departed from the EU, Welsh Government have been considering the current procurement regulations and how those can be amended, reviewed to increase the benefit of public sector procurement to the Welsh economy and society. So the UK Government presented Welsh Government with an option to use the Westminster legislation to reform procurement legislation in Wales, and some of you, as part of supply chain stakeholders, would have been involved in February 2021 with Welsh Government engagement to understand the appetite and aspirations for procurement in Wales. So this is not just specific to food and drink, this is sort of procurement on a wider basis. As a result of that, Welsh Government identified that most stakeholders were generally supportive of the overall direction of travel of the UK Government's Green Paper proposals for procurement reform, but there wasn't enough detail within that at the time. So moving forward to August 2021, Rebecca Evans, member of Senedd, Minister for Finance and Local Government, published a note having considered the risks, benefits, resources and assurances provided by UK Government that a decision had been made that the provision for Welsh contracting authorities would be made within the UK Government's bill. And as part of that, there is an agreement between Welsh Government and UK Government as to how that will happen and the input that Wales will have into that reform bill and how teams will work closely together. So that is happening. In the meantime, the European law is what procurers will continue to abide to. I think it's important to note here that procurement reform, it's about long-term ambitions, and that the UK Government bill is focusing on the procurement process. So consultation took place between December 2020 and March 21 on that UK bill, and the government response to that consultation was published in December 2021. In terms of timescale, it is noted that the procurement reform bill will be introduced when parliamentary time allows, and once that bill becomes an act, there will be need for secondary legislation or regulations to bring it into force. Government are stating that there will be a transition period so that any procurements that have already started under the old rules finish and any new procurement activity will be under the new legislation when they commence. And I suppose this is all to have a simpler procurement process in place. The aim is to replace the existing 7 procurement procedures with 3 simple procedures. A single data platform for supplier registration. So it's one procurement process, and that will mean that suppliers will only have to submit their data once to qualify for any public sector procurement. And also it's stated that the process for challenging procurement decisions will be streamlined. So Wales are following the UK Government bill in terms of procurement process, but actually what's happening in Wales is that there is a further step, which is the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Wales bill. And this legislation is expected to be laid before the Senedd in the spring of 2022, so should be before the Senedd quite shortly. But there's not a clear or exact timetable for implementation at the moment, as Welsh Government are mindful of the support that will be needed by practitioners and industry alike. The aim is to publish statutory guidance that are comprehensive and as practical as possible, and will be published as soon as possible after the bill has gained royal assent. And I suppose this sort of takes Welsh procurement a further step, really, in that it aims to ensure that socially responsible outcomes are achieved from procurement, and enable those involved in and procuring and managing contracts to focus on those social, environmental, economic and cultural outcomes, including fair work, in the consideration of procurement. The Welsh Government have stated that the procurement reform team and the social partnership and public procurement bill teams are working closely together to ensure that there's minimal misalignment between the two bills, and that they complement each other wherever possible. So I think those are the two key pieces, really, of legislation that are shaping how procurement will look in the future. So there will be changes to processes, and the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Bill will provide more of an emphasis within those processes on socially responsible outcomes being achieved. So I've gone through this at quite a pace. There is a lot of information in the background there, and I've just got this final slide really to share with you where you can have those sources of further information. So CELTA Wales has got a defined section which follows the journey, if you like, of procurement reform in Wales. The green paper there, transforming public procurement, the UK bill, there's a link there for that, as well as an email address for the procurement reform team within Welsh Government. Any questions, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Myrddin. We're in the same room, so there's some feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot. We're in the middle of change, but from change there's opportunity. So hopefully there'll be opportunity to deliver on the Môn Larder, the Cymru Larder objectives within that change. We'll see how that plays out over the next 12 months or so. Now we have Jenkins continuing this theme, and we'll talk about social value, and I will share the presentation on this laptop. Craig, can I help?
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I'll just wait for the screen to share. There we go. So in addition to what I'm going to talk about this morning, I just wanted to mention just to the audience that we did host a National Social Value Conference in Wales back in November, where there were over 800 attendees, which clearly, if you go to the next slide, please, Craig, which clearly shows that social value is growing in Wales. What we do now have are some great case studies. And what's clear from the conference is there's a huge appetite to collaborate in Wales, and it's greater than ever when you talk about social value. So Wales clearly is now fast becoming a key part of the delivery of social value. And I think as a group here today, what we need to do is embrace and harness that. So Craig, if you move on to slide 3, please. There you go. So 2022, what's the birthday? Well, as you all are aware, I'm sure, it's the 10 years anniversary of the Public Services Social Value Act, which came into force 10 years ago. And what we've done is we've had a look as a group, and this is a task force, not just within our own business, across England and Wales, around some of the trends that we see that will happen in 2022, some of which will have a direct impact on the food sector, some maybe not. But some of the sectors that we clearly see are going to adopt more so in the social value arena and take their journey on a more sophisticated route in 2022 is the health sector. And as well, interestingly, tapping onto what Sophie talked about earlier, is the corporate or the private sector as well. And I think this will have massive impact on the food sector, which clearly plays a key part in both. We also see that maybe not for the food sector, but there will be a huge integration of social value into the planning process. So social value is not about the construction industry. It's not just about procurement, and it's not just about capital programs. It is about integrating social value very, very early in the journey. And I think the learnings that we can have from the introduction of social value into the planning process will have a massive impact on other sectors as well. Two of the other areas which we feel that will have a massive impact on social value: climate change, top of the agenda. I won't touch on that massively today, but it is about acting locally and thinking globally about how we can create net zero services. But interestingly, and this is one of the key areas that came out of the Social Value Conference, is creating cross-sector collaboration around the place or place-based social value creation. Now, we're working on a number of initiatives at the moment. Some of the more sophisticated ones are in Durham and in West Wales. If you move on to the next slide, please, Craig. So the place-based social value creation, what's it all about? It is about collaboration. it is about talking about the place, and it is all about the communities. Now, in our opinion, and the work that we're currently doing and the evidence that we're getting from a data perspective, is that this will only work and will work from a cross-sector collaboration. And again, from what Sophie was saying, bringing in the private sector to support all activities from public third sector citizens as well. And it needs to be a coordinated programme to drive social value into the communities. And our view as an organisation, and talking to the parties within these cross-sector collaborations, is that food will be a key part in driving these discussions as well. And to my final slide, please, Craig. So it is about making it local, and I think, again, talking about this is where we as an organisation can help and support, whether you're looking at a regional view or a food sector view. We are looking at developing, and if you're not aware of the TOMs, they are themes, outcomes and measures on delivering social value. We are looking at specific routes of developing these in Wales specifically. Currently working with one of the local authorities, Gwynedd, with regards to developing the food TOMs. Now, once we embark on this journey, I would welcome more people to join to support how we can deliver those outcomes into Wales. And that's it for me this morning. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Any questions? Happy to answer. I'll have a look at the Q&A section.
Thank you very much, Prius. It was very interesting from a Menter Môn perspective, because we're involved in a range of activities. As part of our hydrogen project, we've recently been discussing with a food distributor based in Gwynedd, because they're very interested in reducing the carbon footprint. And also we are delivering a Tech Tyfu project, which is a vertical farming project. And there's a lot of interest in schools, but also we've got new growers in Anglesey and Gwynedd. So again, that provides that local, fresh, low carbon food. And what's interesting is the link you can make between the different sectors. So it's
just on that, David, I think, you know, from a Wales perspective, Castell Hywel, Harlech Foods, for example, key drivers in delivering this.
Yeah, we want all their vehicles running on hydrogen.
Indeed.
5 years or sooner. But and Welsh produced hydrogen, which is in itself producing jobs. So the whole thing kind of feeds back on itself. So, okay, thank you very much, please. So on that, we'll move on to Mark Grant. I believe you have your own slides. And I can leave that to you.
David. Yeah, I can share those now, so thanks very much. So good morning, everybody. I'm only going to take 5 minutes, just running through where we're at and the current activity that we're doing. So I'm currently working with the Welsh Government foundational economy team and with the food division, with the simple goal, I suppose, of trying to increase public sector food through Welsh suppliers. And it's been interesting listening to the presentations this morning, because I think I've kind of got the unenviable task of trying to pull a lot of this together, the work that Larder Cymru are doing, the work that Caerphilly and the local authorities are doing, and the work that the NHS supply chains are doing. So I think it's going to be important that we try and give consistent messages to the suppliers in Wales around what we're trying to achieve. And I think with some of the challenges, certainly around school food coming down the line as well, I think the whole capacity and planning for that growth is going to be key to the success of delivering this. So in terms of the work that I've been doing, obviously we're engaging with the North Wales authorities through the good work that Larder Cymru are doing. And I've already had chats with Gwynedd already around some of the work we're doing and the areas we're looking to do. We're also working with Caerphilly Borough Council, who've now taken ownership of the previous NPS frameworks that were published. So they're now working up those with the view of relaunching those frameworks for autumn 2023. And again, trying to incorporate social values and the work that Priest is doing within that, so that we can reward Welsh suppliers where possible for the work that they're doing within Wales. There is some good news already. The NHS Shared Services team already have a number of frameworks where social values is part of that. And we're already beginning to see some wins where Welsh suppliers are gaining more business off the back of that. We're also working with a number of catering managers across some of the different health boards around cook freeze projects. And again, I think this is going to be key to us utilising Welsh ingredients when they're at their best, or actually when they're at a cost advantage to us, so that we can actually take on board some ranges that might be difficult, freeze them down and utilise them to get the best bang for buck for the public sector as well. And interestingly, again, in working with the Welsh Government trade team, we engaged with Leslie Griffiths, who's obviously the Minister for Food and Rural Affairs at Taste Wales in October, and had a really good session around the work we're doing around public sector food. I actually did float the idea that it might be that we need to increase budgets or challenge budgets within public sector to actually get bigger wins for the Welsh economy longer term. And these are certainly discussions that are going on at a high level within Welsh Government. I've had a pleasure of meeting up with Kevin Morgan and supporting him with the work that he's doing around the food procurement guides. And again, you know, there's a wealth of expertise there that we should be tapping into to help us drive more Welsh food into this sector. And on top of that, we're working with the likes of Castell Hawl, Harlech, etc., and a number of Welsh suppliers, looking at some of those key areas that Sophie highlighted earlier to see how we can make more supply and more stock available for the public sector. Now, in terms of the approach to that, I suppose there's two ways of looking at it at the moment, and the approach is quite simple. The first one is to try and look at the existing frameworks that are out there, conduct a gap analysis to see what ranges are being supplied into the public sector, and then influence the current providers to see where we can change them over to Welsh supply. So that's the immediate piece of work we're doing. And I suppose the secondary piece then is to make sure that we're incorporating the work that Preece is doing around social values, excuse me, to make sure that we reward Welsh supply for adding value to the Welsh economy. And it's interesting when Sophie touched on her slides earlier, where she was saying it's really 50-50 as to whether people in Wales believe we should be paying more for Welsh food into the public sector. But I think we need to look at it in a slightly more grown-up way and get away from purely input price. And we need to look at the total value that that Welsh product is adding to the Welsh economy through jobs, through the work that suppliers are doing in communities, and through other aspects of that as well. And I think as we start to move more to social value versus input price, we'll get some bigger wins and we'll get more Welsh suppliers supplying the public sector in Wales. So the key aims, I suppose, for the work that we're doing is obviously make public sector food and drink in Wales more resilient. I think one of the things that came out of COVID-19 really hammered home the need for us to shorten our supply chains, make the suppliers in Wales more resilient, and to make more Welsh food and drink more locally available to us. Obviously, to increase the level of Welsh supply into the public sector, and that can either be direct from depending on the scale of the operation, or via the consolidators that we talked about earlier, Harlech, Castell Hawl, etc. I also think we need to make the public sector frameworks more accessible and easier for suppliers to understand. It is a bit of a frightening area, particularly for an SME, picking up an 80, 90-page tender document. So we need to find ways of simplifying that, making the lotting structure smaller so that other smaller producers can bid for that work, and then actually help suppliers either technically or through collaboration with other people to get them into the supply base. And then I think as well, what we need to do is obviously understand the suppliers that are out there, the capacity that they have to make sure that they're aligned to what we need within the public sector. So that's a bit of a quick whistle stop around the work that I'm doing. Again, my details will be shared by the team at Larder Cymru on the website. And again, happy to pick up any questions in the Q&A. So I shall hand back to you, David.
Thank you very much, Mark. Switch your volume off. What are they? It's the devil of having people in the same room with Zoom. Yeah, so thank you very much, and for your continued support and the support of Welsh Government for the Larder Cymru project. And on that, I will hand over to Greg and to Myrddin, who will talk about the next steps. Here we go.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I suppose and great presentations by all there. I mean, it's worth just reflecting, as David was, if my slide will move and not go to, on the journey very briefly, as David alluded to earlier. You know, we started out with a specific objective of building a supply chain for Wales, but that changed. And in 2019, we refocused our attention on public sector supply. We had a brief distraction when COVID kicked in, and we brought the Negus project to life, which we've spoken to you all about previously. But this is really the reset as Larder Cymru, and the change in name really sort of underlines the fact that we see an opportunity to bring together and work with all areas within Wales that are focused on supplying public procurement and aspiring into public procurement. That's every area, isn't it? You know, and it's fantastic to be working with the likes of Mark, with the likes of Priest, because these are all contributing factors to build this a collaborative approach. And Kevin, who's on the event today, we look forward to bringing Kevin into the fold as well. Because, you know, we believe, as was spoken about earlier, that it's a consistent collaborative approach that will make the most of this opportunity. What we're going to share with you now is just a few specific steps that we're going to be involved in over the next sort of few months. Stress and that there are opportunities to engage with us, but stress that we are open as well to other suggestions as to how we can support the sector to open up these opportunities. So we're going to run a series of workshops as we did before as Mon Larder. We're going to kick those off in a couple of weeks on the 16th of February. And this is geared at people really that are considering supply to public sector. And during that particular workshop, we'll try and give a bit of more of an overview, which we've honed in a lot on, specifically on school meals today, but we'll talk about some of those other areas of opportunities. We'll touch on the process and on the quality standards required and how you might attain those standards. We'll bring in some expertise around the supply chain, and as Mark just touched on, you know, whether there's direct supply, whether there's through distribution, what works best, and then we'll open up for a really sort of healthy Q&A, so we can help to hopefully share with a wider group what it's about and how you get involved. And then we're also going to be running concurrently some one-to-one workshops with Myrddin and myself, and with added experts, if you like, and this will be across the period of this programme, so running until June 2023. The initial process we see is that we'll invite businesses, producers predominantly, to step forward and give us a bit of an insight as to where they are about their business and why they think they might like to get involved in public sector supply. Then we'll run a meeting during which we'll probe a little bit deeper into their capabilities, their capacities, and their ambition. And then from that, we might well identify some need for some specialist support. So, for example, it could be that they want to understand more about social value and potentially get involved in creating a Tom's measurement platform. So we signpost them to Priests, or potentially maybe they want to go and try and get B Corp certified, in which case, you know, Mark's doing some working with the Welsh Government on some programs for that. So we'll identify some signposting and signpost to some other support. In stage 4, we'll come back together and agree an action plan, and then in stage 5 we'll review that action plan a little way along the way, and with a lot of hand-holding along the way. Anybody can apply into this. Menter Môn will be coordinating this as part of Larder Cymru, and those will be live as from today, so please encourage participation. And I'll just hand over to Myrddin now, who will sort of talk to you a little bit about some of the other initiatives.
Diolch, Greg. So one of the things that we have developed our thinking of really from Mon Larder to where we are now is that there needs to be better understanding of the supply and demand within the supply chain that exist in public sector. So we did have the category leads forum in place. We've re-engaged with those leads going forward, but also in this phase of Larder Cymru, there will be a public procurement or sort of buyers forum, if you like, to share insights, to share understanding, and to share knowledge across Wales of those that are involved in purchasing on behalf of the public sector. So we have got in place a date for those meetings to take place on the 2nd of March. The suppliers forum will be in the morning, and then the buyers forum will be taking place in the afternoon. And that's essentially a way of sharing knowledge and understanding those barriers within the supply chains as we move forward, as procurement systems and requirements change over the coming months and years. And then if I can move to the next slide, just to share with you as well that Larder Cymru are still very much involved with events. So if we can move to the other slide. And we'll be attending the Public Sector Catering Expo at the NEC in Birmingham on the 15th and 16th of March with a showcase stand of Welsh produce that is suitable for supply into the public sector, that are meeting accreditation requirements of supply chains that are in place at the moment. And I think that touches on the question that you posed, Beth, on what produce is available. The response to that really, well, it depends on the level of accreditation requirements and the supply chains in place at the moment, but we will be taking a showcase of Welsh produce that is suitable for the public sector to the Public Sector Catering Expo, which is the only event really where catering managers, procurement officers from potentially pan-UK, expecting about 1,000 delegates over the 2 days, and it's a programme of conference, exhibition, demonstrations and competition finals as well within the public sector remit. So that is happening on the 15th and 16th of March.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg and Myrddin. So it's 11 o'clock, so we're on time, which is a bit of a bonus with these type of events. So I'm not going to say much more. I'm just to thank the panelists. So Sophie, Greg, Myrddin, Prius and Mark. I think we've seen the evidence is there. The rationale is there. The legislation is hopefully on its way. We just need to make it happen now, and we're going to be part of that process going forward, hopefully, and ensure there's more local food in the supply chain. So yeah, thank you for everybody that's attended, and we will be in touch soon with more events and activities. Felly, diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Pnawn da. Bore da. Hwyl fawr. Okay. And